YouTube. So welcome everyone to our Nebraska Nature Nerd Night. This one is Musky Mustelids. And like normal, we're going to go ahead and start like we normally do here.
We're going to set off with a nerdy tone. Are you ready, Monica?
I'm ready.
You got to start because all of a sudden I forgot.
Okay, I did too. I was hoping that you would remember.
That's awkward. All right. You're nature-loving scientists.
Be happy like us to start Nebraska Nature Nerd Night.
These parasites.
Snakes and fossils too.
If you're a curious brainiac, we got a show
for you.
So,
all right, everyone, that is usually a lot better.
Usually Monica and I are in the same room, so we just feed off each other and it's way better, but that's what you're getting tonight.
Yeah, we're in the world of COVID and one of us I am in quarantine with my daughter. So here we are, we can still bring Nature Nerd Night to you. We just aren't in the same room with you tonight, but we do have an awesome program ready for you tonight. We have Shaun Dunn here and I'll let him introduce himself. But first of all, my name is Monica McCoubry and I am the Wildlife Education Specialist for the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. Amber, if you want to.
Yeah, I'm Amber Schultz. I'm the Wildlife Education Program Manager of the Fish and Wildlife Education Division in Game and Parks. And Monica and I have been putting this program on now for 5 months. It's been really exciting. And we get to talk to a different expert about and just nerd out about really exciting topics each month. So we're really happy everyone's joining us tonight for this awesome topic as well.
Yeah, and like I said, we have Shaun Dunn here tonight, who is the natural heritage zoologist with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and we will give it to him here in a second, but I am going to share my screen here really quick, just so we can give you a little quick information, and then we will get started and give it to Shaun. So like I said, tonight our program is about Mustelids. So musky Mustelids, fierce fragrant creatures is what we're going to call it tonight. So like normal, if you've joined a virtual program, we do have the right to remove anybody. So if you do have questions, please feel free to utilize that chat button, that chat function. Unmute yourself. We're pretty informal. We want you to ask questions, but just make sure that they keep on topic and that you're kind to everybody. And then, like Amber said, this is our 5th month that we've done this. We only have 3 more Nature Nerd Nights for the end of the year. And then hopefully we will continue this. Right, Amber? I think we have some ideas to continue this. And
too many topics that we want to get in. So for sure.
Yeah, we got a long way to go here. So, so next month, September, we're going to be hearing some stories from the field. We're going to be talking to some of our conservation officers here at Game and Parks about wildlife trafficking. October is Nebraska Reptile Month. We're going to be talking about some venomous snakes and the toxicity and their toxic adaptations. And then our last one of the year is going to be stories from the field. Research flops and failures. So that one should be funny and entertaining, but still also we're going to learn about research and how that goes in the field. So, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Shaun Dunn and I'll let him kind of introduce himself here.
Hi, everybody. So like Monica said, my name is Shaun Dunn. I am the natural heritage zoologist for Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. So what that ends up being is we've got positions, biologists that specialize in certain taxa. And so the zoologist is kind of what's left after a lot of those other biologists have their specific taxa that they look after. So mine are insects and herps, so that's reptiles and amphibians, and then also small mammals that typically aren't hunted, or there may not always be a season for them, trapping or hunting season all year long. So I do a lot of that and try to keep track of those populations. So a lot of what we do is just when something we start noticing either through scientific data or people start telling us, hey, we're seeing fewer of this species. We try to go out and find what's going on. And I know Monica and Amber refer to me as an expert, but I'm not an expert in anything. I prefer to think of myself as like a generalist, if anything. So I know a little bit about a lot of different things that makes me just enough to be dangerous. So I can answer most of your questions, but I probably won't get them all. So,
or you might know if you can't answer them, we might know where to send us to
exactly. Yeah.
Understand.
And that's
Yeah.
great. I hope that people walk away from here with one thing you haven't gotten answered, because then hopefully
Yeah.
you'll go look that up, and that spurs you on to go find more information, because that's what we do. You know, if we don't know the answer, we start digging into it.
Hey, and now you're speaking like not only like a scientist, but as a true educator. So way to go. That's right. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Shaun. I know that Monica and I have had a few like fun moments just in the hallway at Game and Parks, nerding out with you over the most random stuff. So we are excited to get you onto our nerd show to actually do it formally. So you said you're a zoologist. You explained that a little bit. What we really want to know to get started, to start off our show, is what made what's kind of your story with zoology, and what kind of turned you into a wildlife nerd? Did you have like an awakening mid-20s and you just love this, or have you always been, kind of nerdy about wildlife and animals and stuff?
Oh, I've always been this way, unfortunately, from my poor parents. I used to bring everything home: insects, reptiles, snakes. One time I brought home owl castings. So for those of you, are owl pellets. For those of you that don't know, so like most birds of prey, when they eat their food, they can't digest the fur and bones typically. So they throw that up in a nice little ball that's called a pellet. And a lot of times, like, kids will dissect those in schools, and they call them owl pellets. But most raptors do that. And so I used to bring things like that home and dissect them. I think in like 6th grade for my birthday, I wanted a microscope. So I got a microscope. And
awesome.
Yeah, I've always kind of been this way, and just curious about outside species. And like I said, I'm not really a specialist in anything. I've always enjoyed working with all different taxa, and because they're always interesting. And I feel like if I know something really well, it's probably time to move on to something else and find out.
That's a good point.
That.
I like that.
And Shaun, I say this with the utmost respect, and I know I can say it to you because I know you well. That sounds so nerdy, so I'm so glad you're on our show. That's awesome.
Yeah,
you're fitting
absolutely.
right in. So
yeah.
No, I grew up bringing a lot of things home, digging a lot in the ground, and just, trying to find out what was going on. And so it was pretty natural for me when, I started going to college and majoring in biology, and it just felt right. It was definitely what I've always wanted to do.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
And you're working with Mustelids, part of your job. I mean, some of time, yep. Somehow you do it. So let's kind of start off tonight by just talking with some of us. We hear the word Mustelid, and we might know what it is. We might know some about it, but what is Mustelid, and what makes a Mustelid? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's actually kind of a complicated question. Back when we started, I won't go too far back, but when people started classifying animals, they look for things that these animals have in common. And so Mustelids, we tend to think of them as kind of elongated bodies, shorter legs. And in general, that's true. Sometimes the body is broader. Sometimes they do have taller legs. So Latin for Mustelid actually means weasel. So we would initially think, okay, Mustelids are the weasels. But when, they started looking at that, okay, what kind of looks like a weasel? They put all sorts of stuff in there. But for the most part, we know now that Mustelids are mammals. We know they tend to have elongated bodies, short legs. Most of them, all of them in Nebraska at least, but most of them have 1 or 2 anal scent glands, where they will release some kind of really smelly, foul fluid out for a variety of reasons. And majority of them can do delayed implantation with mating. So yeah, that which is a really cool feature. And the majority of them are carnivores. So there are some that we would classify as kind of omnivores, so they eat both plants and animals, but the vast majority of them are mainly carnivores. So that, in a very broad sense, is a mustelid. But if you want to think of what's your standard mustelid, it would be a weasel. That's what
Weasel
they're named
family.
after.
That's what I hear a lot too, is like when they talk about badgers, they talk about like wolverines, they always say the weasel family. So it's interesting that they
Right.
chose the weasel as a mascot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's probably one of the first things, again, the naming and the grouping of these things has changed so much, but yeah, Mustelid overarching is still the name that they use for this large group, because kind of, again, when we look at those basic core features, elongated body, short legs, mammal, most of these species fit that fairly well.
It's
Gotcha.
so funny when you were talking, you're like long body, short legs, blah, blah, blah. All I could picture in my head was like a wiener dog or dash hound.
Right.
Or I'm thinking of
Mustelid, but
I'm thinking of my basset hound, to be quite honest.
Yeah,
if you're
yeah.
describing
Yeah.
Wyatt.
yeah. So
There you go.
I don't know about delayed implantation though. We haven't tested that. So most people have heard of lots of different, they've heard of maybe badgers and things like that. Something that's so exciting and popular in the news, I feel like, is a honey badger. I know working with kids, everyone talks, what about the honey badger? And they get so excited about it. Then I have to break it to them. Sorry, this one is not in Nebraska. We're talking about Nebraska stuff. So, so what about mustelids around the world? I know we'll talk about mustelids right here in Nebraska, but kind of the picture at large, like around the world, what do they look like? What's the family? What's that variation?
Yeah, so honey badger is absolutely in the mustelid family. So again, weasels, and some of the weasels we have here are actually found, in like Europe, Central, South America. But there's also other groups that are very similar. And the other one is otters. So our river otter, there's a sea otter. So that's another one that you find worldwide. So the mustelids are actually found every continent except for Antarctica. And they are typically, again, your badgers, broadly speaking, because they're in different groups. There's, the honey badger, and then there's the European badger, and then there's the North American badger, which now are classified in like 3 separate groups, because while they all kind of act similar genetically, they actually are rather different, yeah, go ahead.
We had just a few, it's related to this question, but people are asking ferrets, minks, they're in the weasel family as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. Ferrets are, so a native ferret to Nebraska is the black-footed ferret. We don't have any in the state anymore, but that is one that was here. And then the mink is also native to Nebraska, and it is a mustelid as well.
Very cool.
Yeah. And so there are a ton of different mustelids across the world. And they do, for the most part, look either like a weasel or a badger when you get down to the core mustelids.
Awesome. So you mentioned like carnivore. So when I personally think of a carnivore, I, think of big teeth, long claws, big animals that can take down something else. But you mentioned that literally all of them are carnivores in this family. So does that mean that, descendants or tree wise, they're related to things like bears and wolves and those larger carnivores that we have had either in our state or around the world? Or is that really?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you start looking at the taxonomic tree of these guys and carnivores in general, we've got, you can break carnivores up into 2 major groups. One is what they call the feliforms, so things that kind of look like a cat, and then the caniforms, so things that sort of look like a dog. And I say sort of because there are some big deviations between those 2, but that's how they started grouping them in the beginning. They had, what looks like a cat, what looks like a dog. And then from there, they kind of group things together. So I've got a couple of slides here that I will share with you, showing the various, there we go.
Oh,
All right, can
cool.
you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is how we used to think the Mustelid family tree was. All of these pictures and these diagrams I took from published literature. I've got the sources below. So I please don't think I made all these. Everybody else has done this and done a fantastic job, so I'm just borrowing them tonight. But this is originally what we kind of thought. We had our skunks, our badgers, and our otters were kind of one group. And then the wolverines, which is another common mustelid, weasels and stoats, and the rattels, which is the honey badger, and then zorillas and kin as kind of another branch, which, by the way, zorilla is a really good one for when you're trying to think of an animal with a Z. You don't always have to use zebra. Zorilla is a really good one. So,
wow.
That is
Yeah.
good trivia to know. All right.
Yeah.
Right.
Little bit of trivia there. So this is kind of what we thought, how everything was related. Then we started doing genetics. And so this is, don't get overwhelmed by it. This shows a lot of the different groups in Carnivora. So the blue ones, if you look at the bottom part here, can you guys see my cursor? Moving a little bit. Okay, bummer. So the bottom part there in the blue, those are the feliforms. So those are things that they decided kind of look like cats. And the top in the red are the ones that they decided kind of look like dogs. So those are the caniforms. And you can see that the group split out quite a bit more than what we had seen earlier. And so they started getting a much better idea of where these animals diverged in evolution and how we came up with those specific tree lines. And so if we focus in on the Mustelids, this is a pretty good chart showing the vast majority of Mustelids in the world. And so you can see that the Mustelids are at the top in that dark green area. And then in the blue are the procyon. So that would be your kinkajous, your coatis, and your raccoons. They're all grouped together. And then if you look right below that, you've got a little red line, and that is actually your Alliurus. So that's your red panda. So they are kind of related to all these things, but they're their own group. They are completely out there on their own branch. And then at the bottom is your Mephidae. So that's your skunks. So we found out that skunks are actually in a completely separate group from your traditional Mustelids. And that was really surprising to a lot of people. You know, they were sure that, you know, it has a stinky scent. It's got the right body type. It's got the shorter legs. You know, it's a lot of, spends a lot of time underground sometimes. And so it just seemed like it fit with the Mustelids really well, but it doesn't. They're in their own separate group, and they actually split off fairly early from all the other species.
How long ago did they decide that skunks are not in the same group? Was that like
so they had some ideas about when this was going on, probably about 10, 15 years ago.
Okay,
and
so
then in the
recent.
Yeah, really recent. And then in the last, I would definitely say 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot of studies coming out looking at those specific markers. So again, I'm not an expert in this, but when you're doing the genetics on a lot of these things, they tend to go look really broad because that's the easiest way to look at it. And then if they see something interesting, they say, okay, we need to look more specifically. And then they need to come in with other DNA. So they look at nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA, and they look at very specific snippets of that. And that's where we tend to find out the real differences in like genera and family. And so
yeah, it's kind of fascinating, Shaun. You and I were talking today about how much that genetic, studying the genetics is changing how we even think about grouping animals and stuff. And we think of maybe all the animals were grouped so long ago and they're here where they are, but they're like what you mentioned, they're constantly changing how, we're discovering who's closely related. And I think it's kind of cool to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this last slide, I promise here is, this shows the revised, about the most current chart that we've got. There's been a few changes here and there. But this gives you a pretty good idea of where we're at as far as relatedness goes with the Mustelids. So the Mustelids, if you can see where it's written on kind of below the skunk there at the top, Mustelids written about halfway down. So everything to the right of that, following the charts, are in the Mustelidae family. And then the skunks and the raccoons and the red pandas are separated. So they're completely out in their own families now.
Cool.
But yeah, this is, just like what Amber and I were talking about, when they first started classifying this, and my wife works on plants. And so she and I have this conversation all the time with plants. When you look at a plant or an animal or whatever species, and you want to figure out what it is, you look at those physical characteristics. So the phenotype, and you say, okay, it's about this big, it's, this kind of body shape. And you may work through a taxonomic key, and you may say, okay, it fits to this one, it goes to this one. Oh, it's this plant, or it's this mammal, or this insect. Well, that's all based on morphological characteristics. So those external traits we can see. But what we're finding with the genetics is that a lot of these things are not related at all. And that really creates a problem for someone trying to make a key, because it used to fit really nicely. They'd say, okay, here's everything in this family. So if it's in this family, you can key it out pretty easily. But that doesn't work anymore.
It's kind of like they're popping open the hood and seeing like the stuff underneath really in that DNA. I was telling Shaun today, and this doesn't have to do with Mustelids, but a few weeks ago, I learned that peregrine falcons, for example, with the new looking at the genotype versus what they look like, peregrine falcons are more closely related to parrots than they are hawks and eagles and things like that. So it's really interesting what we're starting to learn in this field.
Yeah.
That's the fun thing about this field. Everything we're learning new things all the time, right? Okay, so here's our next question is we want to ask about the Mustelids. Are they really highly specialized, or are they generalists? What does that strategy look like as far as what they're eating? If we talk about their niche, and a niche, we like to define niche for people as like where animals live, but also what role they play in that ecosystem, right? So like, what are they specialized? Are they generalists? And also, what are some of their awesome superpowers? What are some of their really cool adaptations?
So it's a large mixed group of a lot of things, as you can see from, this slide here. And I would have to say that it's both. We've got some species that are really specific. Otters, they're swimmers. They don't come out on land quite a bit, but they eat fish. They have this really specialized niche, if you will, that they are tied to, I would say. And then you've got some of the other weasels, like a long-tailed weasel. It's kind of a generalist, it likes to be near water, but it can go just about anywhere where there's food. Mm-hmm. And that also comes into play with the delayed implantation. And so if it's a really abundant year with a lot of food, they won't delay implantation very long. But if it tends to be that there's not a lot of food going on, most of the species can actually delay implantation for 8 to 12 months.
So you said delaying implantation is one of the potential features of Mustelids is the delayed implantation. Can you tell us what does that mean, first of all, and how does that work?
Yeah, so delayed implantation is when in this case, let's say a long-tailed weasel, the male and female come together, they mate. So that means that the female accepts the male sperm, and then they go off and split. What will happen is the sperm will get to the egg, it will fertilize the egg, and then the cells will start dividing. And then usually they get to a certain point, maybe 8 to 12 cells. I'm throwing that number out there. I'm not exactly sure what it is. And then all of a sudden it stops. It just stops right there. Now, the next phase in reproduction would be for that zygote to then move over and implant into the uterine wall. And once that happens, then, it'd be fairly rapid development of the young. But for one way or another, we don't know the exact mechanism of how it works, but it doesn't implant into the uterine wall. It just kind of sits there. And then when we think, for the most part, most of these, we kind of have an idea of the trigger. Sometimes, I'll say most of the time, it's resource related. So when there's enough food, the zygote then moves to the uterine wall and implants, and development continues. And so we see this in certain groups, pinnipeds, so seals, and
sorry, Shaun, did you just say the Latin name of a group and then had to literally think of what the general name was? Is that what just happened?
Yeah.
This is a nerd. I love it.
I had a very strict mammalogy teacher, and so I had to learn all that. So I actually know in some groups, I won't say all, but some groups I know scientific names and families really well, and I do not know common names. And it's not because I'm being pretentious. It's just
no, I love it. Monica and I both we took mammalogy at UNL from Dr. Patricia Freeman, and I will say, the hardest lab I ever had was we had to, at the end of remember this, Monica? We had at the end of the semester, we had to identify all 90 something mammals of Nebraska. We had to say their Latin name, but guess how we had to identify them? I'm sure you know, Shaun, just by their skulls.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I can spot a good zygomatic arch now. I'll tell you that.
That's
right.
That's
good to know. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Nerds. Anyways, so yeah, that's really cool. Delayed implantation is a strategy.
It's one of those things that is really handy, because you think if the only time that some mammals, they tend to be moving around a lot during the end of winter because food is scarce, things aren't greening up. In Mustelid's case, they're eating a lot of other animals, so they've got to move around to find those animals. And so while they're ranging around a lot, they're more likely to run into other members of their own species. So, hey, while I'm over here, let's go ahead and mate, because most of the time Mustelids are solitary. So they're like, hey, let's mate, but now's not a good time for implantation. So things kind of hold off. You get your egg fertilized, because sperm is not going to last. So fertilization has to happen, because sperm, let's be honest, is fairly weak. It's not going to last that long. So once that happens, then the egg can sit there and, it's past the egg stage. It's already starting to divide into multiple cells. But then it can sit there until spring comes and there's much more food resources available.
I think what I'm hearing from you, Monica, is this what you're hearing too, is really the females of the Mustelid groups kind of have some cool superpowers.
Yeah,
right?
Males can't do that. Like Shaun said, the sperm is fairly weak.
Sorry, pretty weak. Checks out. That's funny.
I don't think there's anything in. I'll say I don't want to say anything, because there are no absolutes in the world of wild
anything species. Really.
Right? Yeah, but majority of the time, we know eggs are expensive. They're costly to produce. Sperm is fairly cheap. And it does not last very long. And so, the females have a lot more superpowers, and of course, there's typically a lot more males. And so, get the sperm out there, but the females are the ones that then hold on to that egg and decide whether or not it's going to implant. And I say decide, but it's not a constant.
Right. Some kind of environmental condition triggers that.
Right. Yeah.
it's not just mustelids that have that delayed implantation. There are some other types of animals, right? It's not, I don't know.
Yep.
I think there are
Some
reptiles.
bats do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bats,
And there are
bats
some
do it.
reptiles and amphibians, right? Not amphibians, but reptiles that do it.
Yep.
So it's not just the mustelids, but it's kind of a good superpower for lots of other types of animals too. So
Yeah, you see it more in polar animals too, things that hibernate or go through not always hibernation, but any of the other kinds of diapause or torpor. You'll see a lot in that, but again, no absolutes. It just kind of happens here and there. So
yeah, I know timber rattlesnakes do it. So that's so cool. That's so cool.
yeah, it's really a neat thing, because when you look at what we know there are certain chemicals involved in like when it starts up. There's even some ideas that it may be related to day length. So
I was going to ask photo period.
Yeah, photo period's another one. But a lot of what I've seen is very, they focus a lot on just food intake. So is there enough fat there that the body is going to be capable of producing those young?
That's so cool. They have
Yeah.
so many cool superpowers. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier, so we have that delayed implantation. They're all carnivores. They have all these cool, like short bodies, long, short, stubby feet, long bodies. But you also mentioned that like they smell. They smell.
Yes.
I've heard even some people say that like weasels smell worse than skunks. Like I know that's an opinion question, but
Right.
but I've heard a lot of people say that the animals in this mustelid family are just, they stink, like river otters and weasels and badgers. Are these is this for communication, or is that so that they can find each other, or
yeah, what's the smell about?
Yeah.
So the majority of mustelids, I would say it's a communication effort. So these are species, a lot of them will hide underground or in burrows, under rocks, logs, things like that. Some of them are not very big, and so they are prone to being preyed upon by other animals. So they don't want to be out there, roaring really loud or, making a lot of noise and all of that. So they leave scent behind. And that may be actually leaving some of that actual musky goo on a tree or on the ground, or it may be when they mark a trail with their feces, some of that is on there as well. And so it's absolutely a tool for communication. Now, classically, we would have assumed skunks were in the mustelids. That's where we classified them. But they've taken that to a whole nother level now.
I see.
They've taken what was a communication and turned that into a repellent / weapon, if you will.
Like a defense.
So, yeah, as a defense, exactly.
That's interesting.
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and it's not just mustelids, other mammals have them. Most of us know, like our dogs sometimes have anal scent glands that need to be
I wish I didn't know that, but I do know that. Yeah,
oh my gosh,
I do. Thank you.
If you've ever smelled a dog that has full anal scent glands, that will rival a skunk any day.
Nebraska Nature Night, people, welcome.
Yeah.
We're talking anal scent glands.
Yeah. So
I've been missing
these are absolutely, not core to just mustelids, but a lot of different animals. But yeah, they have these different, smells to them in these anal scent glands that they can express as needed to mark areas. It can also be to draw in mates, but it can also be for territorial reasons of either a similar species or even to a predator to say, look, I'm here, and now that I'm here, you want to avoid me. So kind of just making yourself known.
And you said that it was a goo. Like that's what I got out of this whole thing. It's a goo.
Yeah, I was thinking. Yeah,
a lot of people they think when, like, I know it's not the same family here, but skunks, when they spray, it's like a sticky liquid, like saliva. It's not a gas, like a fart, like a lot of people or kids think it is. It's literally like you're covered in this slime, right?
Yeah.
Same thing.
It's like Nickelodeon slimed. You're getting slimed.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, like the green goo.
Yeah.
Same way.
I would say it is rather viscous, but I would say it's probably not. I haven't handled a lot of it, to be honest.
Okay,
but,
that's fair.
but I would say it's probably more like a runny yogurt, so not a Greek yogurt, but maybe like a regular yogurt. So you can still, that's why skunks are able to squeeze it and project it. It's got to be liquidy enough to go out. But then you also, at least, especially skunks, but other species, you want it to stick where you put it. And so it does have some thickness to it to be able to stick on things. Yeah.
So the nice thing is this is a virtual program, everyone, but you guys are getting the full details of some sensory information right now. So Shaun, thank you for your description of the scent gland. That's fantastic.
So tomorrow when my daughter eats yogurt, I'm going to think, all right, it's just like that.
Maybe wait
welcome.
a week until you're doing that. That's better than our parasite one. I just hope people weren't eating spaghetti during that nature night. Okay, here's what I really want to know, because you've talked about badgers, you've talked about otters and weasels. What about mustelids in Nebraska? Do you have a certain species count? What is it in Nebraska? What does our family of mustelids look like? Can you name them all? Do we know them all?
Yeah. So, well, it depends. Are we including skunks?
The most updated version of mustelids. So we can do a nod to skunks, but
updated, I would say we have 5 in Nebraska. So we have the long-tail weasel. We have the leased weasel. We've got the mink. We have the badger, and we have the river otter.
Sweet.
And then normally, now we would also have had the black-footed ferret, but those are no longer in the state.
Gotcha.
And they're all like super adorable. But I've heard that river otters are not like the sweetest animals. Like they're feisty. Is that right?
They absolutely are. Yeah. They look adorable. You see them all the time floating, and we hear all these cute stories about them. And I mean, honestly, like a baby river otter is just super adorable. You could probably have, so we at Game and Parks have a carnivore and fur bearer biologist, Sam, and he could probably do an entire presentation just with like adorable pictures and stories of river otters. He did a lot of work on them. He's been instrumental in getting our populations back up, because the river otter for a long time was endangered in the state. So
it's a pretty incredible conservation story, a success story,
Yeah,
so that's really cool.
And so Sam worked a lot on those, and I'm sure he's got some wonderful tales. But yeah, they look adorable, but they are fierce. They are absolutely very aggressive. In fact, all of them are. Weasels in general are very aggressive. So one of the more common ones is the long-tailed weasel. And it's about 12 to 18 inches, when you include tail. And it, only weighs about a pound, pound and a half maybe. But it can take down rabbits, like full-size rabbits. And those rabbits are bigger than it. And they, people have seen these things latch on to the neck of a rabbit and just hang on until that rabbit goes down. And then every time they can, the weasel will get a better grip on the neck of that rabbit. And eventually they'll kill them and be able to eat them. But for a mammal that small to take out a rabbit is pretty impressive. And they're all kind of have this reputation as kind of cantankerous.
That reminds me, I feel like I need to remind everyone, does everyone remember that photo that someone actually caught of a weasel riding in, I think it was an acorn woodpecker? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I did see that.
So yeah, just fierce, voracious, and like really, they're really intelligent, aren't they? Aren't weasels in general are known for their kind of high intelligence?
I believe so. Yeah. So they are pretty good. I'm not downplaying what you're saying, but intelligence and luck, because they're actually like really curious. So
Mm.
if you watch like a mink or a long-tailed weasel, like they will duck their head in every little nook and cranny they can find, just looking, because they'll eat anything. So anything from, you know, insects and worms all the way up to, again, like rabbits. Minks will take out waterfowl. So minks are like the water version of weasels. So think of like a small river otter that's not in rivers. They're usually in lakes. They can be in rivers, and they spend a little bit more time on land. But they primarily fish, but they'll also attack like mallard ducks and other animals swimming. I mean, that's like 4 or 5 times the size of that. And again, they go for the neck, they grab onto it, and they just don't let go.
Oh, that's crazy.
They're determined.
Yeah.
I'll give them that.
Yeah. And so actually, can I talk about dentation while we're talking about what they're eating?
Oh, for sure. Their teeth. Yeah.
Dentition, excuse me.
Yeah, let's hear about it.
So yeah, here's a skull of a mustelid. So this is Mustelid nigripes, which is the black-footed ferret. So one that we no longer have in the state. But you can see clearly that, I mean, this thing has got some massive good things on it here, if you will. And what's really neat that you'll see on I think you can see it better on this tooth here, but you see these back incisors. So those are specifically made to act like scissors, and they will cut through meat really well. So you see this on animals that are primarily meat eaters. Their back teeth are really close together, and those act like a pair of scissors and help them chew. So the front teeth, these canines, are used for kind of gripping and getting a piece of the meat off. And then the back teeth, here we go. The back teeth are used for kind of cutting that into, you know, bite-sized pieces.
Isn't that called the carnassial pair?
Yes, exactly.
Like the teeth scissors of the carnivores, carnassial pair. That's really cool.
Yeah. And so here's much bigger one. This is a North American badger. And so if we look at his teeth again, he's missing a few up front, but he's got really good sized canines there for gripping and tearing. And then if we look at the back teeth here, you can see again that kind of scissor-like action where those teeth are really close together and provide a lot of cutting power, cutting action for that jaw. The other thing I want to point out with skulls that you see a lot in carnivores is this sagittal crest that goes up here, and that allows for muscle attachment. So when you see a specific skull, if it's got a really big crest or a really broad kind of area here, that allows for muscle attachment to pull that jaw closed. And so, and if we look at the badger again, so we'll see he doesn't have as big of a crest. The light's got a balance there, but he does have a much larger area because badgers are fossorial, so they're underground. So you don't want to add to how high your head is. You want that nice and low. So this allows for the muscle attachment while still having a lower cranium that's not a lot higher.
That's really cool.
Yeah, if you look at, if you ever see a hyena skull, so hyenas are known, like brown hyenas are known for eating bones because it's usually all that's left out and, you know, where they're at. They have this huge sagittal crest that, and an expanded brain case a little bit in the back that allows for just really powerful muscle attachment.
I was just thinking when you were mentioning that, I was thinking one of the coolest Mustelids there is, Gulo Gulo.
Yep.
The Wolverine, and they're called Gulo Gulo. Essentially, that's that Latin name, and I think isn't it stand for glutton, kind of?
I think so. Yeah.
They basically, because I think that their bite force and their jaw capacity is phenomenal. Because I do think, but you should correct me, can't they chew through bone as well? Or they gnaw on it quite a bit.
A lot of things can. It depends, like bird bones are much easier to get through being hollow. Smaller bones, you know, like the Mustelids here, if they eat a a mouse or something, they can chew up those bones fairly easily. It's probably those larger ones that they would have problems with. But yeah, the wolverine would probably be able to crush most bones.
Yeah, it's pretty
I
phenomenal.
don't know
And
if I've ever seen a wolverine skull though. I'd like to look at that. Somebody Google
and we,
that. And
we don't have wolverines in Nebraska, but we do. They are a really cool mustelid in North America. And I think there's like a really limited population like near Yellowstone and in Montana and stuff, I think, which is cool.
And of course, you know, you can go to Michigan and never mind.
Monica, is that a sport reference? Because I don't get
sorry,
that.
it was a sport
reference. Wrong nerd. No, I'm just kidding. That's fine.
But yeah.
Go ahead, Monica.
Oh, I was going to say, what are you, before we kind of get to our lightning round here, I'm dying to know, what is your favorite mustelid and like in Nebraska or I guess in the world, and why that one?
I've always been partial to the badger. I just think they're really cool. You know, when you first see like the claws that they've got and they, are adapted to digging. They've got, they're just this really cool animal. And I also, I'm not trying to get out of the question, have more than one, but I also really love mink. They're just really cool. Watching those guys come in and out of the water and catch fish. Really, really neat. So I don't know. Badger is probably my first, but mink is a close second.
And another question for you, one more follow-up is why should people care about mustelids? What's something that you want them to know about them? What's that connection of like, of course, we're all here and we're excited about them, but as far as a group of wildlife or a group of animals, why are they important or why should we care?
They're definitely a cog in the wheel, a piece of the food web of Nebraska, but they're a piece that we don't see a whole lot of, other than the skunks, which, are no longer in Mustelidae, but badgers, we'll see every now and then, if you're real quiet and close to water, you can see a mink, but like the weasels, it's really hard to just be out and about and see a weasel. But they do help control like mouse populations, they're one of the things that are moving in and out. They provide food for owls and hawks. The black-footed ferret controls prairie dog population. So, it's one of those things that I think, one of those groups that gets overlooked a lot. And I just think they're cool because they do. Not a lot of people know about them or they forget about them. Again, a lot of people know the badger, but forget that we have little weasels running around.
Yeah. Very cool. Are we doing lightning round now, Monica? We have a lot of questions tonight, right?
We do. We have some really good questions. I guess also, yeah. So Shaun, and if you're not familiar with our lightning round, basically what we're going to do is we have questions that our participants asked and when they registered, and we have a couple in the chat, and not, going as fast as you can, but we want to make sure that we try to get as many answered as we can. So kind of just running through those questions kind of fairly quickly. And then, yeah, that's it. We can start with one that we just got in the chat, actually. Someone asked, is a leased weasel the same as a short tail weasel? That's a good question.
No, they're actually different. So the leased weasel is, Mustela nivalis. And then the short-tailed weasel, I can't think of the specific epithet, but that's also called an ermine or a stoat. And those we don't actually have here. They're more north. So we find those up in, I think the nearest state is probably South Dakota has some, but not here.
Are those the ones that they get their white fur in the winter? Is that correct? Cool.
Yep. So they will get most of the weasels. So the long tail, short tail, and the least will get mostly white during winter, and then they'll kind of transition back. The mink, the black-footed ferret, and the river otter won't.
Okay, interesting. Okay, cool. Go ahead, Monica. You have some of these awesome questions. Are you going from our audience of folks that registered, or do we have any more in the chat?
I don't think we have any more in the chat at the moment, but it looks like from our audience, one of them that we had is, what is the stinkiest mustelid? And again, that one's probably an opinion question, but
Yeah.
what do you think?
Wait, I wonder if you even, is there a variable where you measure stinkiness? Like, you know how there's a scale for spicy pepper? I don't know. I just had a
Right.
thought. I'm just wondering. But
I
anyway,
don't know.
that's fine.
You know, that's a
Good question, right?
I have not smelled them all.
Okay.
I do know. So, you know, of the ones I have smelled, you know, definitely skunk, and mink and river otter. I would say mink, I know, is probably the stinkiest to me. But
Can you describe the smell?
you know,
You don't have
it's kind of fishy. So I'll say that.
That checks out, since that's what
A
they eat.
lot of
Okay.
things that their diet is fish, they smell fishy. So big surprise, you are what you eat.
Here's our next lightning round, Monica. Are muskrats mustelids? Is that what we see in
No.
Holmes Lake? That's a really good question. I've seen a lot of
Muskrats
muskrats.
are rodents, but they are eaten quite a bit by mink. Mink will prey upon muskrats quite a bit. Another little tidbit about muskrats, a long time ago when fur coats were much more in fashion, muskrat was the most common fur used. So people say, oh, I got a mink stole or a mink coat. It was probably muskrat.
Interesting. I know.
Yeah.
I felt we have a pelt in the office of muskrat, and it's incredibly soft.
Yeah, a lot of times it was passed off as mink or something else because, you know, a mink, you don't get a whole lot. A muskrat's a little bit bigger, you can get more fur out of it, but they were also really common and easy to catch.
All right, Monica, you got the next one?
Yeah. Since we're on, like, you know, what do they smell like, and describing their anal glands and their stuff that comes out of them.
It's been a journey tonight.
It has. We're gonna wrap that up with what does their scat look like?
Usually it's pretty small, twisted ends. And in the case of like mink, it'll have a lot of scales in it, like fish scales.
Ooh.
Yeah, sometimes they'll eat some of those and they'll get in there, but it's usually fairly dark, ropey, long, twisted ends. Very general. That's what you're looking for.
If anyone's looking for a great kid activity, or just you want to try this yourself,
we do edible
scat. We do edible scat, and we you know, make it look like with Tootsie Rolls. We get them really warm and then we twist the ends, and we do this with kids. And for fish scales, we add Fruity Pebbles. So if anyone's looking to do an activity,
probably smells a little bit better too.
It smells way better.
And taste perhaps a little, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's great. Oh, okay. Our next one, our Mustelid member is primarily solitary. You kind of talked about that, but that is a case with Mustelids. Is there, you know, they're not like a pack of wolves, right? Do they do any kind of hunting together or anything, or just come together to meet?
They're fairly solitary. Some species will help with parental care. They'll bring food in when the young are there. Others, you know, the males are off right away after mating. But there are, during the time that they're raising young, some will be close together, but for the most part, they're solitary.
Awesome. Very good. We're wondering also, so if some of our participants tonight are Nebraska nature nerds with us tonight, are now so excited about Mustelids, maybe they weren't sure what they were and now they're excited about them. Where's like a good place? You mentioned, I know they're very elusive, but we're in Nebraska, and if they want to go and see one, you know, as a watchable wildlife type of thing, where would they look?
So most things are fairly statewide. So our mink, the long-tailed weasel, and river otters are a little bit more difficult. But most of these things you can find just about anywhere within the state. But the best thing to do is be by water, because a lot of them like to have some access to water. And then it's kind of a waiting game to sit and just kind of wait. And I know I've seen mink just hanging out next to, like, you know, even at like Two Rivers, or, you know, some of our state parks that have even, you know, nice ponds that seem landscaped and everything. Be by the trees and just hang out. And after
You
a
don't have to tell
while,
me twice to do that. That
yeah,
sounds great.
you will see them, but they're really hard to find. So
Are they mostly, at least maybe thinking about the ones in Nebraska, are they mostly nocturnal? Are they crepuscular, which is a fun word, dawn and dusk? Or are they diurnal? Is it kind of vary?
Most are nocturnal. As they get to the end of the winter, beginning of spring, when food is kind of scarce, they're going to be out more just looking for food. But for the most part, yeah, that we would classify them as nocturnal for the most part.
Oh, and that makes me think too, another question. Sorry, Monica, I'm just going with it, but do any of our Mustelids in Nebraska hibernate, or what's their winter strategy?
No, most of them they may go into a form of torpor where they slow down. They may, because they're not eating as much, so they may not be having as much movement. But none of them actually hibernate.
Okay. Gotcha. Very cool. Is there any last thing that you want you're just dying for people to know about Mustelids before we close up this awesome night? Have you looked
I would
say your last stuff? What do you want people to
know? See, that puts me on the spot. I don't know.
Sorry about that.
It's like choosing my last words about a really fun group of animals. But no, I would just say, be aware of them. When you're out looking around, maybe looking for birds or something, check the ground, see if you see scat, see if you see a little hole that looks too big to be a mouse or something,
And their little tracks, like little weasel tracks, are super cool.
Yeah, looking. And they're easy to overlook. So it's one of those things. I think it's easy to overlook the species, but if you increase your superpowers of observation, you'll see some really cool tracks and some really cool signs from them.
Monica, now he's speaking like an educator again. This is fantastic.
I know, that's so awesome.
So one last question. Doug asked, what's the greatest risk to mustelids, or maybe are there any that are in need of conservation? We talked about the river otters, but
river otter
mustelids
lost a lot of habitat. There was a loss of habitat, and also fragmentation. It's not just breaking things up with fragmentation, but it's also the loss of that habitat and the development of certain areas. I think that's been the biggest thing, especially, a lot of these species, as I've said, are tied to water. And we kind of like to funnel our water into rivers, and we don't like it to move. Whereas it used to be, we have a lot more kind of broad wetland areas, and that's really favorable to these, to mustelids in general. And so I think that's probably the greatest threat is fragmentation and loss of large native habitats.
Gotcha. Cool. Great question.
I don't know about you, but I learned a lot tonight.
I learned a lot. And this is one of my favorite groups, and I still learned some cool stuff tonight. Contact information for Shaun. Shaun, are you okay when we send out our follow-up email tomorrow? Are you all right if we put your okay, great.
Yep, that's certainly fine. And again, I don't know it all by any means whatsoever. But if I don't know the answer, I can forward it on to someone who does. So
that's good. Again, a true educator as well. Words of an educator too. Thanks so much, Shaun. This is fantastic. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. Oh, Bethany says, is there a place to sign up specifically for these events? Bethany, we'll send out a evaluation tomorrow. And if you want to include your email address on the evaluation, we'll get you on our listserv of fun Nebraska nature nerd type events for sure. So thanks so much, everyone. And again, thank you, Shaun. That was fantastic. Thanks for nerding out with us, but like for a program this time and not just in the hallway and stuff. So
yeah.
This has been
I'm
great.
happy to do it.
And remember, everyone, to join us again on September 21st for our Stories of the Field. We're going to do wildlife trafficking. Like Amber said, when we send that follow-up email, we'll send a registration link so that you can register directly for it.
Absolutely. All right. Have a nature nerdy night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.